Well, thank you everyone for joining me. I am excited to share a little bit of information with you today about some investing basics. When Andrea and I were talking about what made sense to share with the group, I thought, well, the number one question that I tend to get from not even just prospects or clients, but even younger people or people in school are, what kind of IRA should I invest in? So I put together a small presentation here that I'm going to share with you, and I want to go through it. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to, answer any and all of them. I also put my contact information in so that, so that if you wanted to ask offline, that we could do that too. So is my screen up now? Yeah. Okay, cool. So today's discussion is going to be traditional versus Roth IRAs and how to determine which is best for you. So essentially there are two types of individual IRAs that you can purchase for yourself. Now some of you may have jobs and you may be familiar with employer sponsored plans. So you may have a 401k, or you might have heard of a 401k. Sometimes in a 401k you could have a Roth option, but these two accounts, a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA, are designed for people to be able to purchase on their own. So if you didn't have the option to participate in a plan, this is something that you could do on your own. And the rules aren't very confusing, but there's some real advantages and disadvantages to both, depending on your situation. So I wanted to walk through that with you, just to give you a little bit of clarity on what does it mean to have a Roth and what can it do for you, and what does it mean to have a traditional IRA. So the first question I always get is, how much can you save on an annual basis? And in a Roth IRA and in a traditional IRA, you can save $6,000 a year if you're under the age of 50. And if you're over the age of 50, you can contribute an additional $1,000 for a total of $7,000 per year. It's called a catch-up provision, and these annual contribution limits change year over year. They're the same for 2021 as they were for 2020. So it's information that we update in real time on an annual basis. Anybody can contribute to a Roth or a traditional IRA as long as you have earned income. So as long as you're making money and you're earning an income, you're receiving a W-2 at the end of the year, you can save either in a Roth or a traditional IRA. The big difference and the key to what differentiates and the big difference between the two of them is the tax treatment of the contributions that you're putting in. So if you are looking for tax deductions and are looking for a way to reduce your income tax liability, a traditional IRA is very favorable because you can put up to $6,000 or $7,000 into a traditional IRA, and that's an immediate offset on your reported income. So for example, if you make $20,000 this year and you put $6,000 into a traditional IRA, the government thinks that you only made $14,000 because that $6,000 is deducted from your total earnings, so you only have to pay income tax on the $14,000 that's reported. Alternatively, in the Roth IRA, you can put money in a Roth IRA, but you don't get a tax deduction in that current year. So what this means over the long term is, if you're not paying income tax on it currently because you're using the traditional IRA, you have to pay money, you have to pay the income tax on that at some point in the future. With a Roth, you're not taking a current deduction, but you're also not having to pay income tax on future distributions. So in either situation, you're getting to make money on money that you otherwise would have had to pay for the government. The difference is, do you pay it now or do you pay it later? And for people that anticipate having earnings growth or working longer terms into the future, the Roth becomes very attractive, because when you retire at whatever age you retire, the key age in the government is 59 and a half. So let's say you retire at 60 and you have a traditional and you have a Roth. If you take money out of your Roth IRA, that's tax-free to you. If you take money out of a traditional IRA, you have to pay ordinary income tax on whatever you take out, because you took all of those tax deductions over the several years that you were saving. So that's the biggest star, and I should have highlighted that and circled it in red, but that's the biggest difference between the two of them. And like I mentioned, you can take 59 and a half is the magic age. The government says you can start taking withdrawals out of an IRA without having to pay penalties. But because the Roths are treated differently because of the tax rules, as long as you've had a Roth IRA open for 5 years, You can take out principal without any taxes or penalties of the money that you put in, not talking about the earnings. This is just a nice little reference chart to give you some of the basics on the rules. The income, the trick to these is not everybody can contribute depending on how much money they're making. So for people, young clients that I have that are just starting out, I usually encourage them to choose the Roth IRA, because a lot of them are going to have earnings, earnings increase over time, and they're not making these income limits now. So you make over a certain amount of money on an annual basis, depending on how you file your taxes. It will either allow you to or preclude you from making a Roth IRA contribution. So what this 2020 income limits box in 2021, actually, because they're the same, is showing is that if you have a modified adjusted gross income, that's what that MAGI stands for, of less than $139,000, then you can make a contribution into a Roth. And you can see there's a phase out. So the phase out means you can put a portion of up to $6,000 in it, but not all of $6,000. And then there's a line at which you can't contribute to a Roth. Currently, there's still a backdoor loophole in the tax system where you can get money into a Roth IRA even if you make too much money. What you have to do is you have to make a deposit into a traditional IRA, and then you do what's called a Roth conversion. So you put money into an IRA, you pay the tax on it immediately, and then you can convert it to a Roth. And a lot of people like to do that because, again, at some point in the future, it allows you to have that money grow for you over time. And when you take it out during retirement, you don't have to pay any income tax on it. So those Roth conversion rules are a little bit complicated, and it's not cookie cutter for every single person I talk to. Sometimes it makes sense to do the backdoor contribution. Sometimes it makes sense to do a Roth contribution. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to do a Roth at all. And I, would encourage people to, utilize a traditional IRA, to the extent that they can for the purposes of, setting an individual retirement account. So both are eligible for the Savers Tax Credit. That's a credit that's calculated on your income tax return, whether you do it yourself through TurboTax or whether you use an accountant. That information, what you put in versus your income, your credits are automatically calculated for you. And another advantage to the Roth is that at a point in the future, when you otherwise would normally take money out during retirement, there's no mandatory distribution rules. So under a traditional IRA, because you've been saving money, and you haven't been paying the government taxes on it all these years that you've been saving, at some point they have their hand out and they say, okay, you're going to pay me now. So last year, under the CARES Act, they changed the distribution age to 72. So if you have a traditional IRA and you turn age 72, the government says you have to take a portion out every year and pay the income tax liability on it. There's an IRS table, it's standard and it's calculated, and as advisors, we're very much responsible for making sure that our clients do take these distributions on time. The penalties for not doing it are very, very high, and they're not friendly at all. So traditional IRA account owners are forced to take money out. When you have a Roth, you don't have to have a mandate of when you take money out of your Roth IRA. If you inherit a Roth IRA, there's some nuances to those rules, but generally speaking, there's nobody knocking on your door and saying, okay, the tax man is coming to collect from you now, and you have to give us X amount of dollars every year. So what are the key considerations that you want to look at when you're choosing what type of IRA you want to invest in? I think one of the big things you want to ask yourself is, what will your future income look like? There's a lot of things, I see everything in this business. I have some people say, well, I'm going to practice medicine until I'm 50, and then I'm going to go teach. Well, that means that physician's income might likely go down because their earnings aptitude as a physician is going to be much less than a college professor. But they're okay with that because they just want to, not work as hard from 50 to 60 or whatever they decide to do. I have a lot of people who become consultants or do a lot of self-employment work. So that's, if you plan on doing that during retirement, maybe you will continue to have higher earnings after your traditional retirement age. Your income and the taxability of it doesn't necessarily reduce during retirement. And I tell people all the time, while you're working, you're earning X amount of dollars per year, and then you do want to get to the point where you retire, but do you want your quality of life to change? A goal shouldn't be to necessarily earn less during retirement. The goal should be to structure an investment program where you've got different buckets of money that are taxable in different ways, so that you can continue to have the resources that you're used to, but maybe reduce your tax liability, not necessarily reduce your actual income that you're bringing in. So the other thing to consider is that your taxes are going to change over time. I have 3 kids. They're all minors, and I still claim all 3 of them on my taxes, but at some point in the near future, they're going to be off my payroll, and I'm not going to be able to claim them as dependents. And I'm paying my mortgage off at some point in the future. And the reality is that the tax laws just change on a year-over-year basis. So as we age, we may not have the same ability to claim deductions, to claim credits, things like that. And that means our tax liability is actually going to go up. So if our tax liability goes up over time, that's a consideration to, decide, should I be looking at a traditional, should I be looking at a Roth? And really, I have people who do both, and because they want to have money they don't have to pay tax on, and they want to have money that they, can access, even if they do have some sort of tax liability attached to it. So in general, if you think you're going to be in a higher tax bracket, or if you think you're going to continue to work, through retirement because of whatever your vocation is or whatever it is that you love to do, then a Roth IRA is a good idea to invest in now because of the advantages that it offers you, throughout the course of owning the account, from, for the compound growth on the earnings, plus not having to take out the mandatory distributions at some point in the future. Now that, you've taken a look at, do I want a Roth? Do I want a traditional? What should I do? The next steps are, really to kind of pull together some resources to put together the best plan for you. And everybody has a unique situation. It doesn't matter whether you're in school still, or if you're working, or if you've been working 10 years, the key to setting yourself up for success in the future is making sure that you address your personal situation now. And every situation is different. Investors are not cookie cutter. And that's important to remember, because what your ideas are for yourself are part of your goals. So I always recommend partnering with somebody who can determine, based on your situation, what are the best type of investment vehicles for you, whether you should have a Roth or whether you should have a traditional. And be sure to have an idea of what you're looking to accomplish. As somebody who works with a wide variety of clients, I can tell you every plan I do is different, and no dreams or goals or aspirations are crazy ideas or anything like that. If it's something that's on your bucket list, it's something that we need to build a plan for together to make sure that you can accomplish that. And once you decide what are the appropriate investment vehicles for you, you really want to make sure that you kind of check into your appetite for risk. You have risk in terms of how much money you want to expose to the stock market. So again, not everybody is the same. I have young kids in college who are very conservative, and then I have elderly people closer to retirement who have any problem being invested in the stock market and put all of their money in. Most people fall somewhere in between. But that's important, because as you pick your investment vehicles, you want to make sure that when you get your statements, you're not having agita, you're not getting sick because you're, losing money in a down market, or, nervous because the economy is not doing well. Right now, the market is doing fantastically well. It's hard to understand why it's doing so well, because, it's pretty volatile and it's kind of fragile at the moment, given everything that's going on in the country and the economy. But these are the things that being in constant communication with whoever helps you would guide you on, so that you can determine the best type of strategy for you. So there's 2 components to the strategy. What type of IRAs or other vehicles make the most sense for you? And then what type of diversification do you want on the underneath part of those, so that you can save your money, which is the best thing that you can do for yourself. The hardest thing that you have to do is save your money. If you're working with somebody like me or many of the other people who do what I do, they're going to guide you on, which buckets to put that money in. It's the proverbial, you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket kind of philosophy. You can work with one person, but the eggs in the basket theory refers to you don't want all of your money in Bitcoin, and you don't want all of your money in Tesla, and you don't want all of your money in Apple. You want to have a wide array of different sectors of the market and different types of companies to invest in, because what that normally translates to is better performance over the long term. And long term is considered anything 10 plus years. So, you know, time horizon is also a key component of assessing where do you want your money invested. And that's going to change over time. I'm not sure, I think we have a couple students here, but, you know, as life goes on, we get married and then we have kids, or, you know, some people go through divorces, or we have grandkids, or we have to pay for college, or we buy second homes, and anything that affects your life financially is going to affect the way you feel about your money. So that regular communication piece is definitely key to making sure that you're comfortable with what you have. And then lastly, I wanted to share with you the investment quilt. So I don't know if anybody's seen this before, but this goes to, speaking of the markets and diversification a little bit, but what this chart is, and this one ends in 2017, it shows you which parts of the market performed the best to the worst from the top to the bottom. So the way that they chart this, if one had the lines in it, you would see that not every part of the market does very well in any particular given year. So back in 1998, all the way on the left, large cap growth was the best performing asset class in the stock market, and it did well for a couple of years. But then you can see just 3 years later, it was down at the bottom with a negative 27% return. So that's important to share with you, to give you a visual to see that things change constantly, and you don't want all of your money in any one of these particular boxes because they don't all move in lockstep with each other. So, you know, if you have a good mix underneath the Roth IRA or the traditional IRA, you know, this translates to a broadly diversified portfolio that will give you good returns over the long term. But, you know, the first key, like I said, you know, Roth or traditional, what do your taxes look like? What does your income look like? Which should you save in? And then working to build a plan for yourself around that, taking into consideration all of this extra, you know, information that you can either research on your own or that you can work with somebody to give you. So with that, I try to keep this kind of high level, but I'm happy to entertain specific questions, other questions offline. This is my contact information. If anybody, you know, wants to contact me separately, if you want to ask questions here, but I'm an open book, so this is your time. So utilize me however you can.